Hey everybody, welcome back. So this is it. This is week 14. We only have one more week to go. We're in chapter 13 this week, which is about emerging Africa. So I'm really excited that this is week 14 and we only have one more week. But the other thing that's really important is that you go through and check all of your grades. You're responsible for anything missing, okay, or anything that's graded wrong that you haven't mentioned before. So if you have missing papers, missing quizzes, anything like that, there's still an opportunity to make them up, but you need to do it now because next week is week 15 and then final exams week. And even though we don't have an exam in this class, I will be calculating your final grades, which is simply a total, a sum of everything you've gotten throughout the semester. And if you have missing pieces, especially in this class, it makes a big difference because of the way that points are set up. So that's the most important thing from this week as far as the lecture goes, to make sure you check before it's too late, because once I turn in final grades, there's really nothing I can do. So there's that. As far as the content this week, we're going to do something a little bit different. I want you to go, there's no assignment this week, okay? So I know that there's really no incentive for some of this material unless you need it next week, which you may find that you need. But what I want to do this week is sort of honor system stuff, because I think I think some emerging issues in Africa. And since we're talking about Africa this week, modern Africa, I think these emerging issues are important, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. It's going to be an easy week for you. So for the first thing is you need to read the chapter, or at least go through and skim it, so you can understand, what happened in Africa between the last time we talked about it in World War II and now, and what's going on now, and what the future is. And I think that the chapter does a really good job of saying, hey, after World War II, all the European countries that were imperialist, that had colonized parts of Africa, found that it was way too expensive to colonize and to keep control of those colonies in Africa. So there was really an era of independence that came into Africa, starting actually in the late 1940s and up through the 1960s and the 1970s. And, I was certainly around during the apartheid movement and Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress. So when you're thinking about this chapter and what you should be getting out of it, the first thing I want you to get out of it is make sure you know who Mandela was and what he did. You've heard the name Nelson Mandela all the time, but if you don't really know what he did and how he did it, it's really it's a good read, and I think it's a real good lesson in persistence, and it's a real good lesson also in how modern communications has brought some of these old colonial issues to light. And I would argue that apartheid and the apartheid movement is sort of one of the first global media movements of its type. So it brought a lot of attention to the inequities going on in South Africa, and certainly Mandela was known for really his peaceful demonstrations, but his persistent demonstrations as well. So you should know what the African National Congress, the ANC, was, which was the resistance movement, and you should know who Nelson Mandela was, if nothing else. So check that out. And that's in 14.1 of this chapter. The other thing in chapter 14.2, the era of independence. Independence is in Africa is as diverse as the country itself, because we can't even come close to thinking about Africa as one culture. It's an amazingly diverse place, more than anywhere else in the world, and all the cultures are different, all the way up to the Mediterranean, all the way down to the Cape at the bottom in South Africa. So the era of independence is uneven. Independence emerges at uneven times, in uneven places, and there's a lot of tribalism, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and in the center of Africa. So the era of independence has also become the era of civil war to some extent, and all of the evil and everything you've heard about perhaps Boko Haram. You'll read about that and some of the other tribal wars going on in the Congo is really interesting. And you've probably heard of the Hutu and the Tutsis in Central Africa. And again, that's a long-running civil war. And if you're in the West and you just kind of gradually follow the news, you don't follow a lot of this stuff. But the era of independence has also been the era of civil war. And because there hasn't been a lot of resources in Africa, a lot of things are about following the money, right? There hasn't been any economic growth to lift people up, and even at the basic sense to provide necessary health care and sanitary living conditions. So that era of independence, that section 14.2 in the book also talks about AIDS. And I mean, that's something we know in the West about Africa. We know that there's AIDS in Africa, and it's a real epidemic situation. But at the same time, the West and Africa itself have done a really good job at informing and supplying AIDS patients and HIV potential populations with the medicines and the knowledge they need to try to lessen the impact of this devastating disease that's been going on in Africa for a long time now. So again, era of independence, a lot of civil war, a lot of issues with AIDS, and a lot of like ethnic cleansing has been going on in Africa and still does to this day. There's major wars going on as we speak. And then the change in modern Africa societies, 14.3, talks about the impact of the West and modernity, but really in the central regions in sub-Saharan Africa, the West has very little influence. And it's also, ongoing, especially in northern Africa, ongoing battles between Christians and Muslims. So there's a lot going on in Africa, both from a religious standpoint, a cultural standpoint, and we're going to talk about economics here moving forward. So, read through the book, read those 3 sections, kind of get an idea. I mean, you don't need to know the details here, but kind of get an idea of what's been going on in modern Africa up to the 1950s and 1960s. And then the next thing is I'm going to provide you below this video with 2 links. And one of them is about conflict minerals. And just like this chapter of the book, you don't have to read this all the way through, but I want you to glance at this article and kind of get a feel for what it's saying, because what it's saying is that our cell phones, our smartphones, I was going to hold mine up as a prop. Okay, you all know what a cell phone looks like. Our cell phones and our smartwatches and iPads and that stuff all have a lot of rare metals that are really all come from the Congo, like 70% of them. And I first talked about this in one of my classes, I think about 10 years ago, these conflict minerals and how they came out of warring tribes. But it's an interesting read. So all you need to do here, I'm going to give you this link, read through it. I just want you to be aware of how our modern appliances and our modern devices sometimes start here. So this is mining of caesiurite, which is a primary ore of tin, and tin is used in soldering all the phone circuits together. There's some other minerals that are used in making the capacitors and resistors and electronic parts. A lot of these start here, just like this picture, in these tribal areas in the middle of nowhere in terrible working conditions. So I want you to be aware of that. And the other thing I want you to be aware of is another article. I don't think I have it positioned well on this screen. Let me see if I can move it at all. There it is. So Green Energy's Dirty Secret, It's Hunger for African Resources. And this, again, is a similar article to the conflict minerals one that I talked about just a few minutes ago. But this is talking about metals needed for batteries to run like electric cars and all of this new infrastructure we're supposed to be building out. So the reason I want you to just glance at these is only for awareness. You're not going to be tested on it. If you're lazy and you don't feel like reading this stuff, whatever, there's nothing I can do. But I think it's important to be aware at least of where all this cool stuff comes from, because we get tricked. We see our phones and our electric cars, and we think, oh, we're so clean and modern, and we figured out all these problems with the environment. And actually, no, you didn't. You just moved the problem somewhere else. And in this case, a lot of the minerals and a lot of stuff we need for this modern society are going to come out of Africa, and it's not going to make the situation any better because the people there never benefit from anything. That's the way it goes. So just be aware of all that stuff. Finish up the chapter. And I'll see you again next week. Be safe. Remember, take care of your grades now because it's going to be too late. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.